My mother demanded that I give my adopted daughter back to the social worker, or she would cut off my college funding. I handed something over, but it wasn't my daughter. When I was 19, I made a decision that changed everything. I adopted a baby girl. Her name was Ava. She was only 6 months old, and I had known her for less than 2 weeks, but somehow she already felt like mine. I was in college, barely scraping by on a partial scholarship and a part-time campus job. The adoption wasn't planned. Ava had been born to my cousin, who overdosed and left no family willing to take the baby. Social services were ready to place her into foster care, but something in me snapped. I couldn't let her go. I told them I'd take her, legally, permanently. When I called my mom to tell her, I expected some shock, maybe even a little panic, but nothing could have prepared me for her cold, calculated rage. "You will immediately call that social worker and return that child," she said through gritted teeth, "or I will cut you off. Tuition, housing, car, all of it, gone." I thought she was bluffing. I really did. But that same night, she canceled the rent payment she usually made to my landlord. She even tried to repossess the car she bought me 2 years ago, just like that. "You're throwing your life away for a baby that isn't even yours," she spat when I begged her to talk it through. "You are not equipped for this, and I will not be dragged into it." I wish I could say I didn't cry, but I did. I sat on the floor of my tiny studio apartment with Ava sleeping in her carrier, and I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was afraid of losing college, or the car, or the roof over my head. I cried because the woman who raised me had drawn a line in the sand, and she was making me choose. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at Ava and thought about everything I was about to lose. The next morning, I called the social worker, told her I was ready to give something up. When my mom showed up uninvited that afternoon, furious and smug, I handed her a manila envelope. Inside were the keys to the car, the apartment lease agreement she co-signed, and the university ID she paid for. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Here, this is what you wanted." I gave something up. But it wasn't Ava. She was speechless. For once in her life, she didn't know what to say. And then she walked out, just like that. The silence after she left was deafening. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I had died to her. One minute I was her daughter, the next, a stranger who dared to defy her perfect blueprint for my life. But I didn't have time to mourn, not when I had a baby depending on me for everything. The eviction notice came 3 days later. Turns out when someone cuts off your housing and cancels the rent, your landlord doesn't really care why. They just want their money. I had 10 days to leave or face legal action. I remember sitting on the floor holding Ava, trying not to panic. My scholarship only covered tuition. My campus job paid less than minimum wage and barely covered groceries. And now I had nowhere to live. I tried calling shelters. They were full. I tried friends. Most were living in dorms or with their parents, and the idea of taking in a 19-year-old with a baby? Yeah, that didn't go over well. For a few nights, we slept in my car, the one I had just handed over the keys to. It sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex, unused. I'd glance at it sometimes, just to remind myself that she really took it. I learned how to make formula last longer, how to use the microwave in the campus library without getting weird looks, how to keep Ava warm at night using donated blankets, and the body heat from a tiny cheap heater I found at a thrift store. And somehow, even in the middle of all of that, Ava smiled at me. She had no idea we were struggling, no idea her future was hanging by a thread. She'd just look up at me with those wide brown eyes and giggle like I was her whole world. That's what kept me going. Eventually, someone noticed. One of my professors, Dr. Lin, asked to speak with me after class. I thought I had bombed an assignment or missed a deadline, but instead, she just looked at me and said, "You're not okay, are you?" I tried to lie. I told her everything was fine, but something about the way she looked at me, kind but not pitying, made it all come out. The car, the eviction, the baby, my mother, everything. She listened, and then she did something that I'll never forget. She pulled out her wallet, handed me a business card, and said, "Call this number, tonight. Her name is Carla. Tell her I sent you." I didn't ask questions. I just called. Carla turned out to be a retired social worker who now ran a network of emergency housing for young moms. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for proof. She just said, "Pack your things. I'll be there in an hour." That night, Ava and I slept in a warm, clean room for the first time in days. I couldn't believe it. For the first time since I told my mom no, someone had chosen to help me, not punish me. It felt like hope. But of course, that peace didn't last long. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a lawyer. Apparently, my mom wasn't done with me yet. I stared at my phone, unsure if I'd heard right. "A what?" I asked, gripping the edge of the table. "A petition for guardianship," the lawyer repeated calmly, "filed by your mother. She's arguing that you're unfit to care for the child and is requesting full custody of Ava." My heart dropped. For a few seconds, I forgot how to breathe. "She can't do that," I whispered, though I didn't sound convinced, even to myself. The lawyer sighed. "She can try. Whether it works depends on a lot. Your financial stability, housing, age, education, and her influence." That last word hit hard. Influence. My mother was a respected woman. PTA president, church volunteer, donor to multiple charities. She wore pearls to the grocery store and always had perfect posture. People believed her. Worse, they liked her. And I was the college dropout with no home, no car, and a baby I wasn't biologically related to. I felt sick. She's not doing this because she cares about Ava, I said almost to myself. She's doing it to win, to punish me. The lawyer, a kind woman named Robin, didn't disagree. I've seen it before, she said quietly, and you're right. But we're not going to let her win. Robin offered to represent me pro bono. She said she'd handled similar cases and wasn't afraid of people like my mom. But I had to be honest with her about everything, especially anything that could be used against me. I told her everything. The car, the apartment, the nights we spent in a library bathroom. I was sure she'd tell me we had no shot. Instead, she said, "That just makes you look more committed. You didn't run. You fought for her." But the court system didn't care about sentiment. They cared about paperwork. Over the next few weeks, everything became a blur of legal meetings, character witnesses, and court prep. Carla helped me organize every document. Ava's medical records, the adoption paperwork, letters from my professors and friends. But the scariest part was knowing my mother was building her own case, one I wouldn't even see until the hearing. She reached out once. It was a voicemail. Cold. Formal. "I'm giving you one last chance. Sign over custody voluntarily and avoid the embarrassment of a public hearing. I'll make sure you're taken care of. But if you force this, I won't be so generous." I didn't respond. What could I say to a woman who would rather raise her granddaughter out of spite than see her daughter succeed? The day of the court hearing finally came. I dressed in borrowed clothes, Ava in her only clean onesie. Robin sat beside me, calm and ready. I tried to mirror her confidence, but my hands were shaking the whole time. When my mom walked in, she looked like she was attending a luncheon, not a custody battle. Designer suit, flawless makeup, serene smile. And of course, she wasn't alone. Her attorney looked like he billed by the second. The judge called us to order, and then my mother stood and said the words that made my stomach turn. "My daughter has a history of instability, poor decision-making, and emotional immaturity. I believe her reckless choices are putting this child at risk." She never even said Ava's name, just this child, like she was a problem, a symbol, a thing to be won. I clenched my fists under the table, trying not to cry. Not here. Not in front of her. But then Robin stood, and what she said next would change everything. Robin didn't raise her voice. She didn't match my mother's icy tone or tear her apart. She just stood, calm and composed, and said, "Your Honor, let's talk about what matters, Ava's well-being." She turned and gestured gently toward me. "My client may not have wealth or a traditional support system, but what she does have is unwavering dedication. Despite losing her financial lifeline, she refused to abandon her daughter. She slept in a car, she survived eviction, she worked a part-time job while attending college full-time, all while caring for a 6-month-old. Robin paused. Let it hang in the air. Now, contrast that with the petitioner, a woman who attempted to force compliance by threatening to make her daughter homeless, a woman who didn't offer help but ultimatums. And now she's asking the court to reward her for that cruelty. My mother's smile faltered, just for a second. Robin went on to present character letters from my professors, Carla's statement about my progress in the housing program, and even an affidavit from a pediatric nurse who volunteered to vouch for Ava's health and care. But the most powerful moment came when she held up a photo. It was of Ava asleep on my chest, both of us curled up on a thin mattress in Carla's shelter. "This isn't failure," Robin said softly. "This is what love looks like under pressure." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed moved. When it was my turn to speak, I wasn't sure I could. My hands were shaking and my mouth felt dry, but I forced myself to stand. "I know I'm young," I said, voice trembling. "I know I've made mistakes, but Ava isn't one of them. She saved me. I didn't go looking for her. She was dropped into my life, and somehow, she gave it meaning." I looked over at my mom. "I used to think I needed your approval to be someone, but now I just want to be someone Ava can be proud of." I didn't cry. Not until I sat down and looked at Ava's little face, peaceful in her stroller. The judge asked a few questions after that, technical stuff. Dates, signatures, support networks. Then she said she'd issue her decision within a week. A week. 7 days of not knowing if I'd lose the only person who had ever felt like mine. The next few days were brutal. I barely slept, constantly replaying the hearing in my head, wondering if I'd said too little or too much, wondering if my mom had won again. But on the 6th day, I got the call. Robin's voice was calm, but I could hear the smile behind it. "We won." I didn't understand at first. I asked her to repeat it. "You won. Full custody upheld. Your mother's petition was denied, and the judge cited her behavior as a contributing factor." I dropped the phone and just sat there, crying. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time, it felt like I had really protected Ava. Not just physically, but legally, permanently. She was mine, and nobody could take her away. But as I would learn, winning didn't mean the fight was over. Not with my mother. Because less than a month later, she showed up at my door. She knocked like she owned the place. Not timid, not unsure. Just two loud, deliberate thuds, like she was checking to see if I'd obey her this time. For a second, I froze. Ava was napping in the next room, and my hands were still wet from washing bottles. I debated pretending I wasn't home, but deep down, I knew she wasn't going away, not until I faced her. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a pale pink coat, perfectly styled as always, like she'd just come from a brunch with her country club friends. "May I come in?" she asked, like nothing had happened. No apology, no acknowledgement of the court case she just lost, just entitlement. I didn't step aside. "What do you want?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "To talk." I let out a sharp laugh. "About what? How to ruin my life more efficiently?" She blinked. "Don't be dramatic. I came to make peace." Peace. Right. I crossed my arms. "Then say whatever you came to say." From the hallway. For a second, I saw it. A flicker of frustration under the surface. She didn't like being challenged. Never had. But she reined it in, and her voice dropped to that syrupy tone she used when she was trying to manipulate people. "You're clearly determined to do this on your own," she said. "So I thought perhaps we could start over. I could help with Ava." I stared at her. "You sued me for custody, and that didn't work," she replied smoothly, as if it had been a casual experiment. "But I've had time to reflect. Maybe I went too far, but I still care about her. She is my granddaughter." "No," I said sharply. "She's my daughter." We stood in silence for a beat, and then she tilted her head slightly. "I spoke to someone at your college," she said, voice casual. "They said if you reapply for next semester, you might still get partial funding. But of course, you'll need childcare. I could offer support, real support. Not just financial." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. She still thought she could buy her way back in, rewrite the narrative, make herself the benevolent grandmother, the savior. But I wasn't the scared 19-year-old she used to control anymore. "You're not coming into Ava's life just because you lost in court," I said. "And you're definitely not using her to repair your ego." Her face hardened. The act was slipping. "I gave you everything," she hissed. "And you threw it away for a child that isn't even yours by blood." There it was. The truth she'd been holding back. Not about love, not about concern, just pure resentment. "She's mine," I said low and firm, "in every way that matters." She stared at me for a long moment, eyes cold. Then she straightened her coat, turned, and walked away. No goodbye. No threats, just silence. I closed the door and locked it, physically, emotionally, symbolically. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I felt something shift inside me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. After that day, she disappeared again. No more surprise visits, no letters, no lawyers, just silence. And honestly, I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd finally drawn a boundary she couldn't cross. But trauma doesn't just walk away when the person causing it leaves. It lingers, like smoke after a fire. For weeks, I found myself looking over my shoulder, checking windows, sleeping with my phone on loud, convinced she'd find another way to get in. Not physically, emotionally, legally. Through people I didn't even expect. Paranoia, exhaustion, guilt. It all wrapped around me like a fog, and through it all, Ava kept growing. Her first birthday came in a blur of secondhand decorations and dollar store cupcakes. Carla baked a cake. My campus friends chipped in to buy a little stuffed elephant. Ava didn't understand what was happening, but she laughed when we sang to her. She clapped her chubby hands and smeared frosting in my hair. It was perfect and painful. Because for all the joy, there was still this voice in the back of my head whispering she should have more. More than what I could give. More stability. More space. More everything. That guilt was the hardest part. One night, I sat with Carla after putting Ava to bed. I confessed everything. That I was scared I'd made the wrong choice. That maybe my mom was right. Not about Ava, but about me. That maybe I really wasn't enough. Carla looked at me for a long time before saying anything. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a photo. It was old, creased and faded, of her holding a little boy, maybe 5 years old, next to a courthouse. "My foster son," she said softly. "He came to me with night terrors and bruises, and this belief that love had to hurt. I wasn't perfect. I was broke, exhausted. But I chose him every day until he started believing he was worth choosing." She handed me the photo. "You're not failing Ava," she said. "You're teaching her that love doesn't give up." That hit me like a brick, because I realized something I hadn't before. My mom raised me to believe love was conditional, tied to performance, obedience, image. But Ava was going to grow up knowing something different. She'd know love that stood in courtrooms, love that slept in cars, love that let go of privilege and pride and comfort just to hold on to her. That night, I sat next to Ava's crib and whispered a promise into the dark. "I'm going to mess up. I'm going to fall short, but I will never stop fighting for you, ever." I meant it. But I didn't know then. The next fight was already on its way, and this time it wouldn't come from my mother. It would come from someone I thought was on my side. His name was Marcus. We met at a campus event for single parents. He had a toddler named Zoe, and he seemed different. Grounded, kind, The kind of guy who brought his daughter everywhere, always had snacks in his backpack, and remembered to ask how Ava was doing even when I looked like a sleep-deprived zombie. For a while, it was harmless. We'd meet at the park, let the girls play on the swings, trade stories about diaper blowouts and late-night teething. He made me laugh. And more importantly, he made me feel seen, not like a train wreck, not like a cautionary tale, just like someone doing her best. It started slow, texts, then coffee, then a movie night where Ava and Zoe fell asleep on the same blanket while we sat awkwardly on opposite sides of the couch. I wasn't looking for romance, but I was lonely, and Marcus felt safe, so I let him in. Big mistake. At first, it was good, normal. He helped with groceries, walked Ava to daycare with me, even fixed the heater in Carla's place when it started acting up. But then, little things started to shift. He'd comment on how tired I looked, how maybe I should let him take over sometimes, how he could handle things if I just needed a break. It didn't sound awful at first, but something felt off. Then came the suggestions. You know, if we moved in together, we could split expenses, give the girls their own room. If we were married, people would take you more seriously in court. If you really want Ava to grow up stable, maybe she needs a real family. That one stopped me cold. Ava has a real family, I snapped. He backtracked, apologized, said he just meant well, but it kept happening. More pressure, more subtle jabs. And then one day, I came home from class early and found him sitting on the couch, holding Ava, without asking, without me. My blood ran cold. She looked fine, happy even, but it was the assumption that shook me, that he could just take over, that he already thought she was his. We had a long talk that night. I told him he was moving too fast, crossing boundaries, that Ava wasn't some placeholder in a fantasy of his. He didn't take it well. "You're lucky anyone wants to deal with your mess," he said. I asked him to leave, for good. He slammed the door on his way out. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a visit from CPS. An anonymous tip. Concerns about instability, unsafe visitors, neglect. I knew it was him. I knew it. The social worker was kind, but firm. She had to investigate. She had to check Ava's living conditions, interview me, even visit daycare. My heart was in my throat for days. Carla told me to stay calm, that if I had nothing to hide, it would pass. But that wasn't the point. The point was, someone I trusted used the most vulnerable part of my life as a weapon, and once again, I was fighting to prove I was enough. The social worker's name was Melanie. She wasn't cold or judgmental like I feared. In fact, when she stepped into our little apartment, toys scattered, dishes drying, Ava wobbling around with her blanket cape, she smiled. But that didn't stop my stomach from twisting. She went through her checklist: housing, food supply, Ava's medical records, daycare reports. She asked questions about routines, safety plans, support systems, and I answered all of them honestly, even when it felt like baring my soul to a stranger. "Has anyone besides you taken care of Ava recently?" she asked. I hesitated. "Marcus," I admitted, "but not anymore. He crossed boundaries. I ended it. I didn't think he'd do something like this." Melanie nodded, scribbled something down. "You're not the first mom I've met who trusted the wrong person," she said. "What matters is how you responded." After the visit, I barely slept. Every time Ava laughed or asked for juice, I wondered if this would be one of the last days I had her. That fear is unlike anything else. It claws at you, wraps around your spine, makes you question every decision you've ever made. But 2 days later, Melanie called. Her tone was lighter this time. "I closed the case," she said. "Everything checked out. I'm sorry you had to go through that." I nearly collapsed from relief. But after I hung up, the tears came. Not because I was sad, not even because I was angry, but because I was just so tired of fighting to prove I was good enough to keep the one person I loved most. I sat on the floor with Ava, who was babbling about a toy giraffe, and I held her tighter than I probably should have. She giggled and said, "Mommy squishing me," and I laughed through the tears. I'd made it through another storm, but I knew now, really knew, that this wasn't just about survival anymore. If I was going to raise Ava in peace, I couldn't keep living like I was always one mistake away from losing her. I needed roots, stability, something permanent. So I made a decision. I was going to finish college, no matter how long it took, no matter how many nights I had to study after Ava went to bed. I'd take online classes, night classes, community college credits, whatever I could afford and fit into our lives. And more than that, I was going to build a home that no one could threaten again. Not my mother, not an ex, not the system, just me and Ava on our terms. But life had one more twist waiting for me, because a few weeks later, I got a letter from my mother's lawyer. This time, it wasn't about custody. It was about her will. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. It had that same cold elegance everything from my mother did. Expensive paper, embossed lettering, perfectly aligned margins. Like grief and control needed to be delivered in style. The letter inside was short. My mother had updated her will. She was terminally ill. Cancer, advanced stage. And despite everything that had passed between us, she had left something to Ava, not to me, to Ava. A trust fund, significant, enough to pay for private school, college, even a first home someday. But there was a condition. The trust would be released to Ava only if I agreed to name my mother as her spiritual guardian, a symbolic title with no legal authority, but one that would be formally documented, her way of ensuring she was remembered, immortalized. I almost laughed. Even facing death, my mother couldn't resist manipulating the narrative. It wasn't about Ava's future. It was about her legacy. Carla was the first person I told. She didn't give advice. She never did unless I asked. She just listened while I ranted, cried, debated. She's dying, I said bitterly, and she still needs to win. But she's also leaving Ava something, Carla said gently. That's a door you closed. She's opening it again. Just think about what it means. Not for her, for Ava. That night, I sat on the floor with Ava's baby book. I flipped through the pages, milestones, photos, scribbled notes, all the firsts I had witnessed alone, all the decisions I had made without my mother, and yet, my mother had still shaped this journey. Her absence had taught me just as much as her presence ever did. So I wrote a letter, to be included with the will. It said this: to whoever reads this someday, my mother was not a kind woman. She gave with one hand and controlled with the other. I loved her once, and then I feared her, and finally, I let her go. But she loved Ava in her own broken way, and maybe this is her version of trying to fix that. So I'm accepting the trust, not for her, but for Ava. But let it be clear, my daughter does not owe her memory, only the lessons she left behind, and I will make sure those lessons end with me. I signed the papers. Ava would get the money, my mother would get her name etched somewhere meaningless, and I would get closure, or so I thought, until the funeral. Because when I showed up, not for her, but for me, I saw someone I never expected, my father. The man who left when I was 5. I almost didn't recognize him. He was standing near the back of the chapel, alone, hands stuffed in his coat pockets. Older, thinner, grayer, but unmistakable. The curve of his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around like he didn't belong. I hadn't seen my father in over 15 years. No calls, no letters, no child support, just gone. And yet, there he was, at my mother's funeral, like a ghost materializing just to mess with my sense of reality. He didn't notice me at first. The room was mostly filled with my mother's church friends and former coworkers, all whispering sanitized versions of who she was. She was so elegant. She did everything for her daughter. She just wanted what was best. I wanted to laugh, but Ava was in my arms, wiggling slightly, unaware of the tension pulsing around us, so I bit my tongue. When the service ended, I stood up to leave, but then I felt it, a presence behind me. "Hey," a low voice said. "You probably don't want to see me." I turned. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just less. "Then why are you here?" I asked flatly. He exhaled. "She told me I wasn't wanted after the divorce, said I was a threat to your stability, said if I ever came near you again, she'd drag me through court and make sure I lost everything." I stared at him. "You believed her?" He looked down. "I was young, scared, broke. I thought maybe she'd do a better job without me. I wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he'd been, how every night I cried for him. She told me he didn't love me, that he left because I wasn't enough. But Ava tugged at my sleeve. 'Mommy, go home now?' And just like that, I couldn't scream, because I didn't want to be the mother who poisoned memories, who erased people. 'I have a daughter now,' I said instead. 'Her name's Ava. She's everything.'" He nodded slowly. "I heard, through someone. I wasn't sure if I should come today, but I needed to. I guess I wanted you to know I never stopped thinking about you. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. But I gave him something I never gave my mother, a second chance. We exchanged numbers. I told him I wasn't promising anything, just that he could call, see where it led. No expectations, no rewrites of the past, just honesty." Later that night, after I tucked Ava in, I sat by her crib and thought about the legacy I wanted to leave her. Not money, not guilt, not chains disguised as tradition, but resilience, clarity, freedom. And I realized I was already breaking the cycle. But the world wasn't done testing me yet, because the next morning I got an unexpected visit from Ava's biological grandmother. She was nothing like I imagined. I opened the door in my old hoodie and mismatched socks, thinking it was a delivery. But instead, I saw a woman in her mid-50s, standing awkwardly with a weathered tote bag and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many winters. "I'm Marlene," she said, Ava's other grandmother. I didn't respond. She looked nervous, like she was ready to be turned away. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she added quickly. I didn't know about the adoption. I didn't know what happened to her, to my granddaughter." I let the silence stretch for a long beat because I remembered. Marlene was the woman who didn't show up when Ava was born, the one who declined to take custody when social services called, the one who vanished after her daughter overdosed and left Ava behind like trash on a doorstep. "You were notified," I said quietly. She winced. "I was grieving. I wasn't sober. I wasn't able." That part, at least, I understood. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. "I'm not going to unadopt her," I said firmly. "She's mine. That's not changing. I'm not asking you to," she replied quickly. Wanted to meet her, or at least know she's okay. You have no idea how many nights I've wondered what became of her. I didn't know what to say to that, because on one hand, she had failed Ava, but on the other, she didn't fight for her the way my mother did, out of pride or image or power. Marlene just disappeared, out of weakness, out of fear. And somehow that made her feel less threatening and more heartbreaking. She's okay, I said softly. She's more than okay. I didn't let her in. I wasn't ready for that. But I gave her a photo, one I kept in my wallet. Ava on her second birthday, covered in cake, laughing so hard her eyes were closed. Marlene held it like it was something sacred. She looks like my daughter, she whispered. I didn't correct her, because Ava did. And that wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was part of her story. Thank you, she said before walking away. I watched her go, unsure if I'd ever see her again. That night, as I tucked Ava in, she looked up at me and said, "You look sad, Mommy." I smiled. "Not sad," I said, "just remembering and maybe forgiving, a little." I wasn't ready to rewrite the past, but I was learning that sometimes healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, conversations, photos, closure. But just when I thought things were finally calming down, an envelope arrived, no sender listed. Inside, a photo of Ava, taken at daycare, with a note that read, "She deserves to know the truth, or I will tell her myself." My hand started shaking before I even finished reading the note. I flipped the envelope over, checked again, no name, no address, no clue who sent it, but I knew one thing for sure. Someone had taken a picture of my daughter without my knowledge, at her daycare, in broad daylight. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was panic. My second, fury. I called the daycare immediately, demanded to know how a stranger could get close enough to photograph Ava. The director, Mrs. Howell, sounded as alarmed as I was. "No one unauthorized has signed in or visited," she assured me. "We'll review the footage, I promise." I hung up, pacing, heart racing. Who would do this? It didn't sound like my mother, too dramatic, too blunt. It didn't sound like Marlene either. She'd left quietly, gently, regretfully. There was only one person who made sense, Marcus. I hadn't heard from him since the CPS stunt, but this was his kind of cruelty, disguised as concern, dressed up as righteousness. He always believed he knew better, that he was owed something. I called Robin, my lawyer, and sent her a copy of the note. She didn't mince words. "This is intimidation," she said. "If it escalates, we'll file for a restraining order. But document everything, every message, every photo. Keep Ava close." I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking Ava's room, peeking out windows, flinching at every sound. The next morning, I walked her to daycare myself. I scanned every face, checked every car. I told Mrs. Howell I didn't want Ava playing outside until we figured out who it was. That night, another letter arrived. This time it was typed. "She's not yours. Not really. You're just playing house. She'll find out eventually how her real mom died, what kind of blood she has. Better it come from me than a lie from you. No threats. No name. Just poison." I sat on the kitchen floor, shaking, and tried to hold back the scream bubbling in my chest. I knew I'd have to tell Ava the truth someday, about her birth mother, about everything, but not like this. Not like this. Carla came over as soon as I called. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me, held my hand, and said, "This is a scared man trying to make you feel smaller. That's all." But it worked. I felt small, powerless, exposed, until I remembered I had options now. I had proof. I had people. I had power. The next day, I filed a police report. Then I went one step further. I filed for an emergency protection order. Robin said we didn't have concrete proof it was Marcus, but the pattern, the history, the sudden resurgence, it was enough to raise alarms. And then, I made a choice. I took Ava and moved, not across the country, just across the city, a new apartment, closer to my new job, with better security, tighter access, a neighborhood where I felt like I could breathe. I changed my number. I updated the daycare with new safety protocols. I locked the door every night with a new sense of finality. And through it all, Ava just kept being Ava, joyful, curious, entirely unaware of the chaos swirling around her, until one night she found the envelope. She brought it to me, holding it upside down. "Is this mail?" she asked innocently. I took it from her gently. "Yeah, baby, but it's not important." She looked up at me. "Okay, but I don't like it. It smells like mean." That's when I realized she could feel it too, even if she didn't understand it yet. And I made myself another promise. No one would ever make her feel unsafe again, not even from the shadows. Weeks passed. No new letters. No strange cars. No more threats. Part of me started to wonder if it was over, if Marcus had backed off or maybe gotten scared after the police report, but the pit in my stomach never really left. It just settled deeper. Until one afternoon, I got a call from Mrs. Howell at the daycare. "We have a situation," she said. My heart stopped. She continued. "A woman came by asking about Ava, said she was family and needed to check on her. She didn't have ID, wasn't on the pickup list. We followed protocol and turned her away, but she left angry." "Did she give a name?" I asked, heart racing. "Yeah," she said her name was Danielle. I almost dropped the phone. Danielle was Marcus's sister. We'd met once. She smiled a lot, asked too many questions, gave me that same I know better than you vibe Marcus had. She was soft-spoken, but strategic, the type who didn't need to raise her voice to twist a knife. And just like that, everything clicked. The letters, the photo, the threats. It wasn't Marcus, it was her. She was the one behind it all. Maybe he'd told her things. Maybe she thought she was protecting Ava from me. Maybe she genuinely believed the fantasy they'd built, that Ava should have been their daughter, that I had somehow stolen her. I called Robin immediately. She didn't hesitate. We file for a protective order against her too, and if she contacts you again, we press charges. That night, I couldn't eat. I kept looking at Ava, playing with her toy kitchen, humming to herself, and I felt this rising rage I couldn't shake. Why did they want her so badly now, when it was hard? When it required real sacrifice? Where were they when she was sick at 2 a.m.? When I had to walk in the rain to buy diapers? When I was begging for shelter and risking everything? They didn't want her. They wanted control, just like my mother did. But I wasn't 19 anymore. I wasn't scared and scrambling and desperate for approval. I was a mother. I was Ava's mother, so I took back my power. I installed cameras. I spoke to the daycare about restricting access to everyone who wasn't me or pre-approved. And I wrote a statement, long, detailed, emotional, outlining every single thing Danielle had done, from the letters to the unauthorized visit. Robin said it was exactly what we needed. But even with all that, one question burned in the back of my mind. Why? Why would Danielle do all this? What was her end game? I didn't get the answer until a week later, when I got an envelope in the mail. Inside was a photo of Marcus, holding a baby, next to Danielle. The note read, "She deserves to be with her real family, her blood, her father." I couldn't breathe. I read the note again, hand trembling. Her father. No, that couldn't be true. Ava's birth certificate had no father listed. The social worker had told me her biological dad had never come forward. He was a ghost, a rumor. But now, here was Marcus, holding a baby, standing beside Danielle like a proud family man, and the note was clear. He thinks Ava is his. I felt like the ground was shifting under me. I wanted to scream, "He's wrong," but a seed of doubt had already lodged itself deep in my chest. What if there had been a mistake? What if Ava was his daughter, and no one had told me? What if the system failed me? Or worse, what if he knew all along and was just waiting for the right moment to strike? I called Robin, again. "I need to know," I said. "I need proof. Real proof." She was already one step ahead. "We'll file for a DNA test, but let's be clear. Even if he is the biological father, he has no parental rights unless he goes through the courts. Ava is legally yours." I heard her, but I couldn't calm down, because biology had always been the one thing I couldn't give Ava, and now someone else was trying to weaponize it. I looked at my daughter, hers and not hers, mine, but not from my body. A miracle I hadn't asked for, but had fought tooth and nail to keep, and now I had to fight again. We scheduled the test. Marcus was smug when we saw him at the clinic. He didn't speak to me, just nodded like this was some business deal he was finally closing. He actually had the nerve to smile at Ava. She didn't recognize him. She clung to my leg, confused and quiet. After the swabs were taken, I asked him, "Why now? Why come after her now?" He shrugged. "She deserves to know where she came from." "No," I said sharply. "You mean you want to feel important?" He didn't deny it. "I won't lose her," I said, voice shaking. "Not to you, not to anyone." "You already did," he replied. "You just don't know it yet." I left before I could throw something. The waiting nearly destroyed me. Every moment felt like a countdown. Every time Ava called me mommy, it felt like a prayer I was begging the universe to keep. And then the results came. Robin called me personally. "Negative," she said. 0% match. Marcus is not the biological father. I dropped to my knees in the middle of the room and sobbed, not just from relief, but from the release of weeks, years of fear. He wasn't her father. He never was. And now, we had proof. Robin sent cease and desist letters to both Marcus and Danielle. We updated the protection orders. We even notified CPS about the false claims they'd made previously. They were officially cut off. Legally, permanently. I was finally free. But as I sat with Ava that night, brushing her hair while she babbled about puppies and dinosaurs, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. She didn't need blood to belong. She just needed me. But I wasn't quite done telling her story, because one last letter was still sitting unopened, from my mother's estate, and inside was the biggest secret of all. The envelope had been sitting on my bookshelf for weeks. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not after everything. Not after Marcus and Danielle. Not after the DNA test and the endless fear. I just wanted peace. But something about that letter lingered, like it was calling me. It was from my mother's estate executor. Plain white. No return address. Just my name, written in her precise, cold handwriting. Probably left behind before she died. Part of the inheritance she couldn't resist controlling even after death. Late one night, after Ava fell asleep on the couch beside me with a half-eaten cracker in her hand, I gave in. Inside was a folded letter, 1 page, typed. "If you're reading this, then you've chosen to accept the trust for Ava. That means you're finally making mature decisions, even if you don't see it that way. I know you think I hated your choice to adopt her, but I didn't. not really. I hated what it represented. How easily you threw your future away for a child that wasn't even your blood. What I couldn't tell you then, and what I only decided to include now, was this. You were adopted too. We never planned to tell you. It was a closed adoption. You were ours in every legal way, but not by blood. I only tell you now because maybe you'll understand, finally, why I fought so hard, why I was so scared, why I couldn't let go. I was afraid you'd repeat my mistake and disappear into someone else's story, but you didn't. You made your own. I didn't say it when I was alive, but I'm saying it now. You were always enough, and maybe so is she. I read it 3 times. Then I sat in silence, letter in hand, staring at Ava, and I laughed. A bitter, broken, freeing laugh, because in the end, my mother's final attempt to control me set me free. Everything made sense now. The obsession with blood, the resentment, the fear. She saw herself in me and hated what she saw, because deep down, she knew the truth. Love isn't made of DNA. It's made of late-night feedings, emergency room visits, broken shoes taped together before school, stories whispered in the dark, unconditional choices made again and again, even when it hurts. I folded the letter and tucked it away, not because I wanted to keep her words, but because one day Ava might ask about her story, about mine, and I'll tell her the truth, all of it. Not because she needs to know her origin, but because she deserves to know her power. We are not the product of the people who leave us. We are the result of the people who stay, and I stayed, through everything, because that's what real family does.